My name is Emma Lockhart. I'm 40 years old. And the moment that shattered 40 years of family lies didn't happen in a federal courtroom, or during a hostage negotiation, or even when I pulled Maria, 6 years old, chained to a radiator out of a trafficking den that smelled like death and broken dreams. It happened at a backyard barbecue. 4th of July, 2024. Sparklers crackling, corn on the cob steaming, my father holding court like he did every summer. But this time, when he raised his beer and announced to 30 relatives that I'd never have a future, probably still wasting my time with some useless job, something inside me finally broke. Not my spirit. That had been forged in places they couldn't pronounce, tested in ways they couldn't imagine. What broke was my need for their approval. Because while they laughed at their family joke, CNN was about to make me their breaking news. The backyard looked like a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Red, white, and blue bunting draped from the porch railings, American flags stuck into flower pots, and picnic tables groaning under the weight of potato salad, corn on the cob, and Mom's famous apple pie. The charcoal grill sent smoke spiraling into the summer air, mixing the smell of burgers and hot dogs with the faint scent of gunpowder from fireworks testing in the distance. 40 years old, and I was still sitting at the kids' end of the table. Not literally, there were actual children running around with sparklers, their laughter mixing with the Toby Keith playlist Dad had on repeat every 4th of July since 2001. But I might as well have been 12 again, occupying that same invisible space I'd carved out at every family gathering since I could remember. Tyler commanded the center of attention, as always. At 38, my younger brother had everything Dad had dreamed of in a Sun corporate law degree from Columbia, partnership at a white shoe Manhattan firm, wife who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread about successful families. Their 2 kids, 8 and 10, hung on his every word as he regaled the table with stories about his latest high-profile case. $47 million settlement, Tyler announced, raising his beer bottle like he was accepting an Oscar. Defense tried to lowball us at $12 million. I told them they could take our offer or we'd see them in court. The applause was immediate and genuine. Dad's chest swelled with the kind of paternal pride that had never quite extended in my direction, his eyes shining as he looked at his golden son who'd validated every sacrifice and exceeded every expectation. "That's my boy," Dad boomed, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Lockhart determination. Never settle for less than your worth. Never settle for less than your worth. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. While Tyler basked in the attention, I sat in my corner chair wearing a simple denim jacket and jeans, nursing a Coke and trying to blend into the red checkered tablecloth. Around me, conversation flowed like expensive wine talk of vacation homes, private schools, and the kind of success that gets measured in stock options and country club memberships. "Tell them about the victory party," Tyler's wife, Sarah, prompted, her diamond wedding ring catching the afternoon light as she gestured animatedly. The partners threw this incredible celebration at the Rainbow Room. More stories, more applause, more validation for the son who'd chosen the approved path to success. I half listened, my mind elsewhere, replaying events from 3 days ago when I'd stood in a warehouse basement in Atlanta, leading a team of federal agents through the most complex raid of my career. 46 children. That's how many we'd rescued from a trafficking network that had been operating with impunity for over 2 years. The youngest was 6 years old, a little girl named Maria who'd been sold by her own uncle to men who saw children as commodities instead of human beings. But there was no way to share that story at a family barbecue. No way to explain that while Tyler was negotiating corporate settlements, I was pulling terrified kids out of hell and putting their captors in federal prison for life. "Emma's been awfully quiet," Aunt Linda observed, her voice carrying that particular tone of concerned disappointment I'd been hearing for 2 decades. "What's new with you, honey?" All eyes turned toward me with the kind of polite attention usually reserved for distant relatives you're obligated to acknowledge but don't really want to hear from. "Not much," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Just work." "Still doing security?" Uncle Bob asked, his question loaded with the assumption that I'd never progressed beyond checking IDs and walking mall beats. Something like that. It wasn't technically a lie. I did work in national security, as a senior special agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration's Human Trafficking Task Force. But my cover required vagueness, half-truths, and letting people draw their own conclusions about my ordinary government job. Dad's laugh cut through the afternoon air like a blade. Security work, 40 years old and still playing rent-a-cop. The words hit like a physical blow, precise and calculated to find the places that hurt most. Around the table, relatives shifted uncomfortably but didn't object. This was Dad's show, his celebration, his platform to hold court about success and failure in the Lockhart family. "She'll never have a future," he continued, his voice getting louder with beer and audience attention. "Probably still wasting her time with some useless job that'll never amount to anything." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, it was worse. It was casual, dismissive, the kind of polite amusement that said, "Thank God that's not my kid." I felt heat crawl up my neck as 20 relatives nodded along with his assessment, treating my entire existence like a cautionary tale about what happened when you didn't follow the approved script for success. 40, no husband, no kids, Aunt Linda murmured into her potato salad, loud enough for half the table to hear, still nothing to show for her life. "Still checking IDs and chasing shoplifters?" Cousin Rick chimed in, probably thinking he was being supportive. "Maybe it's time to consider something with more growth potential." Growth potential. Each word landed like shrapnel, finding every insecurity I'd carried since childhood. I gripped my napkin under the table until my knuckles turned white, feeling that familiar urge to make myself smaller, to disappear entirely from their field of vision. The memory hit me unbidden last Christmas, sitting in this same backyard while Tyler announced his promotion to senior partner. Dad had raised his glass then too, toasting his son's achievement while I'd sat in silence, carrying classified knowledge about a case that had taken 3 trafficking kingpins off the streets. But the real memory that cut deepest was from when I was 10 years old, watching Dad teach Tyler to throw a football while I stood on the sidelines holding the ball he'd never offered to teach me to catch. "Girls don't play football, Emma," he'd said when I'd asked to join. "Why don't you go help your mother with dinner?" Even then, I'd understood that some achievements were meant for sons and others for daughters, and I'd somehow ended up in the wrong category for everything that mattered to him. "The thing about Emma," Dad continued, warming to his annual theme, "is that she's never been ambitious enough, never had that killer instinct you need to really make something of yourself." Killer instinct. If he only knew about the instincts I'd developed during 8 years of federal law enforcement, the ability to read body language that revealed deception, the tactical training that had kept me alive in situations where hesitation meant death, the psychological skills that had allowed me to gain the trust of traffickers who would have killed me without hesitation if they'd suspected who I really was. "She's always been content with just getting by," he added, his voice carrying that tone of paternal disappointment that had shaped every major decision of my adult life. "Never wanted to put in the real work it takes to build something meaningful." Real work. The irony was so thick I could taste it. While Tyler had been building his legal career in air-conditioned conference rooms, I'd been living in roach-infested motels, posing as a drug-addicted prostitute to gain access to trafficking networks. While he'd been networking at corporate events, I'd been learning to speak fluent Spanish and basic Mandarin to communicate with victims who'd been trafficked from around the world. While he'd been celebrating victories with champagne at the Rainbow Room, I'd been sitting in hospital waiting rooms with children who'd been so brutalized they couldn't speak above a whisper. But there was no way to explain that without blowing a cover that had taken 2 years to build, without jeopardizing operations that were still ongoing, without revealing secrets that could get me killed if they fell into the wrong hands. So I sat there, taking their casual cruelty like I'd learned to take enemy fire during tactical training, absorbed, processed, but never allowed to derail the mission. The mission was keeping people like them safe while they barbecued in their suburban backyards, arguing about school districts and property taxes, completely unaware that predators moved among them every single day. "Here's to real success," Dad concluded, raising his beer bottle higher. "To building something that matters, not just marking time until retirement." The toast echoed around the table, glass and aluminum clinking together while I sat there absorbing their judgment like small arms fire. 20 people who shared my DNA but had never bothered to understand the first thing about who I'd become or what I'd sacrificed to serve something bigger than quarterly earnings and performance bonuses. In the distance, the first fireworks of the evening began exploding against the darkening sky, rocket's red glare illuminating a celebration of freedom that was only possible because people like me were willing to walk into darkness so others could live in the light. But tonight, I was just Emma, the 40-year-old security guard who'd never learned to dream big enough to deserve their respect. Tomorrow, I'd go back to work dismantling criminal organizations that would give them nightmares. And in 48 hours, when CNN broke the story about Operation Safe Harbor, they'd finally understand exactly what kind of shadows I'd been chasing all along. Dad was still basking in the laughter from his toast when the first firework exploded overhead, painting the backyard in sudden bursts of red and gold. The neighbors had started their show early, rockets whistling skyward before bursting into showers of sparks that reflected off the beer bottles and serving dishes scattered across our picnic tables. That's when CNN's breaking news tone cut through the celebration like a knife. That sharp, urgent sound that makes every conversation stop dead, that signals something significant has happened, something that demands immediate attention even from 4th of July barbecues and family gatherings. This is CNN with breaking news. The shift in the backyard was immediate. 20 heads turned toward the living room where the 65-inch flat screen was visible through the sliding glass doors. Conversations dying mid-sentence as the red breaking news banner filled the screen. Federal authorities are calling it one of the most significant human trafficking takedowns in decades. I felt my blood turn to ice water. Number not here. Not now. Not in front of them. The anchor's voice carried clearly through the open doors, cutting through the sounds of distant fireworks and the low hum of the grill that Dad had forgotten to turn off. Senior DEA Special Agent Emma Lockhart, age 40, is being honored tonight by the Attorney General for her role in dismantling a trafficking network that spanned 6 states. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat. 20 people frozen in place, beer bottles suspended halfway to their lips, conversations abandoned mid-word. My name, my full name and age, on national television. Agent Lockhart, the anchor continued, led Operation Safe Harbor, an 18-month undercover investigation that resulted in over 40 arrests and the rescue of 46 children, some as young as 6 years old. Dad's beer bottle slipped from his fingers. I watched it fall in slow motion, brown glass shattering against the deck in a spray of foam and fragments that caught the fireworks' light like scattered diamonds. The screen switched to footage I recognized immediately: surveillance video from the Atlanta warehouse raid 3 days ago. There I was, in full tactical gear, leading a team of federal agents through a basement where children had been held in conditions that would haunt my dreams for years. The operation, which authorities say dismantled one of the largest trafficking rings in U.S. history, was the culmination of Agent Lockhart's 2-year deep cover assignment infiltrating the criminal organization. 2 years, deep cover assignment. The words hung in the summer air like smoke from an explosion. I could see my family's faces as they tried to process what they were hearing. Not security guard, not checking IDs. Senior DEA Special Agent, Federal Law Enforcement, Human Trafficking Takedown. We're going live now to the Department of Justice, where Attorney General Patricia Williams is holding a press conference. The screen switched to a podium flanked by American flags, where the Attorney General stood with the kind of authority that comes from representing the highest levels of American law enforcement. Ladies and gentlemen, her voice carried clearly through our suddenly silent backyard. Tonight we honor Senior Special Agent Emma Lockhart, whose extraordinary courage and dedication have struck a devastating blow against one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. My official photo filled the screen, the one taken during my promotion ceremony last year. Not the casual family snapshots they were used to seeing, but a federal law enforcement portrait that showed someone in dress uniform, face serious with the weight of responsibility most people couldn't imagine. Agent Lockhart, the Attorney General, continued, spent 18 months living undercover, infiltrating a criminal network that was trafficking children for sexual exploitation across state lines. Her psychological training and tactical expertise were instrumental in bringing these predators to justice. 18 months, living undercover. While they'd been mocking my useless job, I'd been posing as a drug-addicted prostitute to gain access to people who bought and sold children like livestock. Uncle Bob's mouth was hanging open like a broken door. Aunt Linda had gone completely pale. Tyler was staring at the screen like he was watching something impossible, his corporate confidence evaporating in real time. The children rescued in this operation, the Attorney General's voice grew stronger with emotion, range in age from 6 to 17. They had been subjected to unimaginable trauma, held in conditions that can only be described as modern slavery. I thought about Maria, the 6-year-old I'd carried out of that Atlanta basement. She hadn't spoken a word since we'd found her. But she'd drawn me a picture yesterday, a house with a family inside, stick figures holding hands under a yellow sundae. Recovery would take years, maybe decades. But she was safe now because someone had been willing to walk into hell to bring her home. Agent Lockhart's work, the Attorney General continued, required her to maintain deep cover for 2 years, living a completely fabricated identity while gathering intelligence on some of the most dangerous criminals in America. Deep cover. Fabricated identity. While they'd been dismissing my career as meaningless, I'd been living multiple lives, each one designed to get closer to monsters who saw children as commodities. The trafficking network dismantled in Operation Safe Harbor was responsible for the exploitation of over 200 children across 6 states. The arrests made possible by Agent Lockhart's investigation have effectively destroyed this criminal enterprise. 200 children. The number hit that backyard like a physical presence, settling over the 4th of July celebration like smoke from a battlefield. Cousin Rick was gripping the edge of the picnic table so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Sarah, Tyler's wife, was staring at me like I was someone she'd never seen before. Which, in a way, was exactly right. Agent Lockhart, the Attorney General said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute federal authority, represents the very best of American law enforcement. Her sacrifice, courage, and unwavering commitment to protecting the innocent exemplify the values we celebrate on this Independence Day. Independence Day, the irony wasn't lost on me. While they'd been celebrating freedom with hot dogs and fireworks, I'd been working to free children from modern slavery. The President of the United States, the Attorney General concluded, has asked me to personally convey his gratitude for Agent Lockhart's service. Her actions have quite literally saved lives and struck a blow for justice that will resonate for years to come. The President of the United States had personally asked the Attorney General to thank me for my service. The press conference ended, cutting back to the CNN studio, but I could see that nobody in my family was listening anymore. They were all staring at me, the woman who'd been sitting in the corner chair 5 minutes earlier, being mocked for wasting her life on a useless job. Dad's face had gone white as bone. The same man who'd just finished explaining why I'd never have a future was staring at me like I was someone he'd never seen before. Emma, his voice came out as barely a whisper, broken and uncertain. You're really a senior special agent with the DEA, I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force. 8 years of federal service. The words hit that backyard like a controlled demolition, systematically destroying every assumption they'd built about who I was and what I'd been doing with my life. Tyler found his voice next, though it sounded like it was coming from someone else entirely. But you said you worked security. You never said you were DEA. I said I worked in security, I corrected. I never said what kind. Around the picnic table, relatives who'd spent the evening explaining why my life was meaningless were now processing the fact that their failure of a niece had just been personally thanked by the president for dismantling one of the largest human trafficking networks in American history. 46 children, Mom whispered, her voice thick with shock. You saved 46 children. I looked at this woman who'd raised me, who'd spent 40 years worrying that I'd never amount to anything, who'd just learned that her daughter's useless job involved rescuing kids from modern slavery. That's what we do, I said simply. We protect people who can't protect themselves. The broken beer bottle glittered on the deck like fragments of the reality they'd constructed around my supposed failures. Dad was still staring at me, his proud toast about Tyler's corporate success suddenly seeming very small compared to federal operations that saved children's lives. The fireworks continued exploding overhead, red, white, and blue, bursts celebrating the freedom that was only possible because people like me were willing to sacrifice everything to protect it. But in that backyard, the only sound was silence, the kind that follows when people realize they've been catastrophically wrong about someone they thought they knew. The woman they'd dismissed as a failure had just been revealed as someone who walked into darkness so children could live in the light. And the 4th of July celebration that had started with mockery had become something none of them would ever forget. The silence that fell over the backyard was heavier than any silence I'd ever known in that house. Not the comfortable hush after family dinners, not the stillness of sunset conversations, but the kind of silence that follows when people realize they've been catastrophically wrong about someone they thought they knew. 20 relatives sat frozen around picnic tables littered with half-eaten burgers and forgotten sparklers. The grill hissed in the corner, still burning, while fireworks popped in the distance. But in that backyard, nothing moved. For the first time in 40 years, I didn't feel the urge to shrink. I stood slowly, feeling every eye on me, not dismissive this time, but wide with shock, shame, and something close to awe. All my life, I began, my voice steady. You measured me against Tyler, my choices against his success, my worth against his accomplishments. You never saw me, only what I wasn't. I let the words hang there, the truth echoing louder than the fireworks above. You thought I was wasting my life, I continued, while I was living undercover, dismantling networks that sold children like property. While you toasted real success, I was pulling kids out of hell. The memory of Maria flashed in my mind, 6 years old, chained to a radiator, her eyes too broken to recognize safety when it came. That image was more real than the shocked faces staring back at me now. 2 months ago, I said, voice sharpening, I spent 3 days locked in a shipping container gathering intel. The youngest victim there was 6. But you never asked about my work. You didn't want to know. It didn't look like Tyler's corner office, so you dismissed it. Dad's voice cracked as he finally spoke. Emma, we had no idea. Why didn't you tell us? Because I couldn't, I answered. Because my cover had to be complete even from you. Lives depended on it. But more than that, Dad. I stepped closer, locking eyes with him. You never wanted to know. You were too busy being disappointed in what I wasn't. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, his confidence gone. Emma, if we'd known. I turned to him. You'd have what? Respected me? Treated me like I mattered? You shouldn't need a federal commendation to believe your sister has value. No. The words cut through the summer night like glass breaking. For 18 months, I pressed on. I lived as someone else, a broken addict, invisible, forgotten. I became so convincing even trained agents believed I was just another victim. That invisibility saved lives. The same invisibility you mistook for failure. I gestured toward the fireworks exploding beyond the trees. You see freedom lighting up the sky. I've seen the darkness that exists, so you can watch those fireworks without fear. Mom was crying now, tears streaking her face. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I should have been proud of you all along. A lifetime of hunger for validation flickered inside me and then dissolved. Their pride no longer defined me. I already knew who I was. I know you are now, I said gently. But your pride shouldn't depend on a news report. It should have been there because I worked hard, because I chose service over comfort, because I gave everything I had to protect others. I slipped my denim jacket over my shoulders, ready to leave a party that had turned into a reckoning. The children I rescued, I said, looking around the table one last time. They're safe tonight because someone was willing to walk into hell for them. That's not wasted time. That's not a useless job. That's a life well lived. I moved toward the gate. Dad's voice broke behind me. Emma, please, don't leave like this. We want to understand. We want to know who you really are. I paused, turning back one final time. You're 40 years too late, Dad. The good news is, I finally understand who I am, and that's all the understanding I need. I walked out into the night. Fireworks thundered overhead, painting the sky in red, white, and blue symbols of freedom I'd fought to protect. The woman they dismissed as a failure had been revealed as someone who walked into darkness so children could live in the light, a hero long before CNN named her one. Yesterday, Maria handed me another drawing, a woman in uniform standing beside a house filled with children, all of them smiling beneath a yellow sundae. She'd scrawled 2 words underneath in shaky letters. My hero. That was all the validation I'd ever need. If this story resonated with you, here's what you can do. Share your own story. Drop a comment below about a time when people completely misjudged your work, your dreams, or your worth. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Tag someone who needs this. We all know someone who's been underestimated, overlooked, or made to feel small by people who should support them. Send this to that person. Let them know their worth isn't determined by other people's limited vision. Follow for more untold stories. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things in silence. The heroes among us don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear uniforms, carry badges, or work night shifts while their families sleep safely.